Well, I'm Chris Matthews. You know me from Hardball on the Chris Matthews Show. And one of the great stories of my life was being administrative assistant to the Speaker of the House, Thomas P. Tip O'Neill Jr., that legendary character, and every day working with the Speaker as he went to war with Ronald Reagan. And together, the great irony is, these two fellas fighting with each other the right way made government work. The 1980 election for president came as a surprise to everyone, really. The good thing about the result of that election was that both sides knew what had happened. The president, in this case Reagan, knew that he had won and acted accordingly with a big program of tax cuts and big defense increases and some social spending cutting. The Democratic Party, led by Tip O'Neill, recognized they had lost the election, and therefore he fought the debate, he argued it, he battled as much as he could, but he didn't try to obstruct. There was an understanding of what the voters wanted, and both sides recognized that. I think what's different back in the 1980s, if you look at them compared to today, is that both parties, in this case a conservative Republican President Ronald Reagan and a liberal opposition leader Tip O'Neill, a Democrat, both believed in government. They both believed in letting it work. So, for example, neither one said, I'd rather the government shut down or we have filibusters or obstruction or all kinds of Mickey Mouse, if you will, rather than the other side win. Today, most of the fighting in politics is whether you have a vote or not, whether you actually have an unobstructed opportunity for an up or down decision. And therefore, the government is generally in deadlock. And we didn't have deadlocks in the 1980s. We had decisions, and that was the difference. When Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan weren't talking politics, they were getting along quite swimmingly. They would sit around, maybe have a drink, maybe have a party together. Certainly many St. Patrick's Days they spent together as Irish Americans. There is a wonderful moment, however, when Reagan was in the hospital right after he was shot, and Tip O'Neill was allowed to be the first one in to see him because Jim Baker, the chief of staff, thought that would be a good way to honor the American political system, to have the opposition leader as the first one in to see the president. And he went in to see him, and he realized that Reagan was in much worse shape than had been advertised, and he knelt down on both knees next to the gurney, and he held Reagan's two hands, and he was actually seen kissing Reagan on the forehead, and they recited the 23rd Psalm together, these two old Irish guys, and, you know, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. When you behave like that with each other, there's a positive result, which is if you try to be friendly, except for the disagreement, you can occasionally find places where you can agree. There's about three areas where they really did work together, these two fellows. On issues like tax reform, where they were able to lower the rates down to 28% top rate. Think about that today, the top rate for the individual, 28%. They also did immigration reform. Now they got it through. It had a lot of the elements we're talking about today, but also employer sanctions. You shouldn't be able to hire people illegally. Now, unfortunately, later on it wasn't really enforced, but they really were making some ground there on that one. The other one they made ground on was the Anglo-Irish Agreement, and it was the first step where Tip O'Neill went to Reagan secretly and said, you've got to get to Thatcher because of her support of the Unionist position in Northern Ireland. And they really began the steps which led to 1998, and I was there, to the Good Friday Accord and the end to the violence in Northern Ireland. In 1985, we'd gone through the Cold War for almost, 30 years, and there was no real light at the end of the tunnel. And along comes this guy Gorbachev, a lawyer, a smart guy. Tip O'Neill said he reminded him of a New York lawyer, whatever that meant. He went over to see Gorbachev, and he was the one that told Gorbachev about Reagan wanting to meet with him and how Reagan really wanted to negotiate. And Gorbachev said, well, what are you? And he said, well, I'm the opposition leader. And Gorbachev said, what's that? They weren't familiar with that opposition leader. And Tip said, and I thought this was one of the great lines I came across, he said, it means we don't disagree on everything. And one of the things they didn't disagree on was loyalty to this country. And so Tip went over there and made sure that he said, when Reagan comes to meet with you, recognize him as the leader of our entire country, not just the Republicans. And then when Reagan got to meet with Gorbachev in Geneva that fall, Tip made sure the Democrats didn't cause any trouble. When it came down to defending the country in terms of nuclear arms negotiations, Tip made sure that Reagan had a free hand. It ended the Cold War because the two parties could get together and make sure Reagan represented this country in a united front. It's pretty stirring stuff, actually, when you read back in this history.